This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream. Hey, welcome to 12 Tones. Scales are a musician's best friend. Learning to use and appreciate new scales is one of the best ways to develop your musical vocabulary, so today I thought I'd look at one of the most important families of scales in more advanced styles of music, the modes of harmonic and melodic minor. Now, a lot has already been written about these. Just Google that phrase and you'll see pages and pages of guitar magazines, music blogs, and even a very old 12-tone video, but most of them, myself included, have the same basic problem. At heart, they're just lists. They tell you the notes in the scale, possibly with some guitar fingerings, and maybe if you're lucky they'll even mention which chord it sounds best over, but a scale is more than a set of notes. A scale has a sound, a character, an identity, so I think it's worth taking a look at what these scales are actually like. Let's start with the parent scales. As you might imagine, harmonic minor and melodic minor are both variants on, minor. More specifically, they were invented to solve a problem with the natural minor scale. You see, in major, if we play the 7th note, it has a really strong pull back up to the root. It leads you back, so we call it the leading tone. It works because it's super close to the root. It's only a half step below, which is the smallest interval in standard tuning. The leading tone is a crucial part of traditional harmonic practices, but the minor scale doesn't have one. Here, the 7th is a whole step away, so we don't get that pull. It's a simple fix though. We just take that 7th and raise it back up. This fixes our harmonic issue, so we call it harmonic minor. However, it's not without its own flaws. The minor 7th was already a whole step above the minor 6th, so raising it up means that even though these two notes are consecutive, they're still a minor third apart. Or technically it's an augmented second, but I don't care. Anyway, while later musicians often found this fourth leap to be an upside of the scale, adding a little extra pepper to their melodies, it was just too much for old-timey composers, so instead they doubled down on the whole raising notes thing and lifted up the 6th too, making melodic minor. So, okay, that's our parent scales. Let's talk modes. A mode is when you take a scale and play all the same notes, but treat a different one as the root. You might think that'd make them sound really similar, but the root is such a large part of a scale's identity that changing it can make it almost completely different. Like, as an example, minor is a mode of major. In fact, you know what? Let's go over the modes of the major scale first. This may be review for some of you, but I think it'll help. These are often listed in the order they appear in the scale, starting with the first note as the root, then the second, and so on, but I'm gonna do things a little differently. I care more about what they actually sound like, so I'm gonna arrange them by brightness, which for these purposes is just how sharp the average note is. So, like, if we take the 4th mode, Lydian, we see it's a lot like major, but we've raised the 4th up a half step. Despite being a tritone above the root, moving the 4th away from the 3rd actually makes the scale sound more stable. From there, we can lower that 4th to get major, the 1st mode, which when we're talking about modes is sometimes called Ionian instead. Next, we can lower the 7th to get the 5th mode, makes a Lydian. This has a wistful sound to me. It's exactly like major except without the leading tone, so it's bright but directionless. It's also what's called a dominant scale, which means it has the necessary notes to build a dominant 7th chord off the root. We'll get to why that matters later. Anyway, from there we can lower the 3rd to get the 2nd mode, Dorian. And to my ears at least, this actually sounds happier than Mixolydian. That's because lowering the 3rd put us in the realm of minor scales, so instead of hearing this as Mixolydian but flatter, it sounds like minor but with a raised 6th, giving us a friendlier sort of minor scale that gets used a lot in folk music. From there we can flat the 6th to get minor, the 6th mode, which is also sometimes called Aeolian, and then flat the 2 to get the 3rd mode, Phrygian. This is like the opposite of Dorian. It's minor but even flatter, so you get this dark, almost evil sound. It shows up a lot in metal. And finally, we get the 7th mode, Locrian, by taking Phrygian and flatting the 5th. This doesn't get used much because without a perfect 5th, it's incredibly hard to stabilize on the 1 chord. Alright, with that out of the way, let's turn our attention back to harmonic and melodic minor. What did their modes look like? Well, since minor is a mode of major, we should expect that our modified minor scales will produce modes that look a lot like the ones we just saw, but with some slight alterations. Is that what we get? Well, let's dive in. Technically, we should start with the 1st mode, but that's just harmonic and melodic minor again, so let's skip to the 2nd one. The 2nd mode of minor is Locrian, so we should expect these to look similar, and harmonic minor obliges with a scale called Locrian natural 6 because it's just like Locrian, but instead of a flat 6 it has, you know what, you get it. In terms of sound, this is pretty much the same as Locrian, and you can use it in basically the same circumstances. The diminished one chord is such an important part of that scale that moving around the other notes doesn't really change much, at least not in this case. The leap from flat 5 to 6 is interesting, but by and large, this is just Locrian with a fancy hat. Melodic minor, on the other hand, gets a bit weirder. Its second mode raises the fifth back up, giving us a normal minor scale with a Phrygian second and a Dorian sixth. You can call this Dorian flat 2, Phrygian natural 6, or if you're feeling rebellious, Phrygian Dorian. This is neat because it gives you access to different emotional colors depending on where in the scale you are. You can lean on that gnarly flat 2, maybe over Phrygian's signature flat 7 minor chord, or you can get that bright folksy major 6 with Dorian's 4 major. You can even string them together for a really unique, if slightly unusual progression. But let's move on to the third modes. The third mode of minor is major, so these should sound basically major, right? Well, that's harmonic minors, which is often called major augmented, and you may have noticed the complete lack of a perfect fifth, which, yeah, that's not ideal. Much like Locrian couldn't stabilize on a diminished one chord, here our one chord is augmented, so again, it's pretty hard to actually, do anything with this scale. You can use it as a chord scale, which is where you play it temporarily over one chord in a progression, but that only works if you find yourself soloing over a lot of augmented chords. And it gets worse. Melodic minor looked at this scale that already can't stabilize on its one chord and thought, hey, you know what this needs? A note of tritone above the root. That's Lydian augmented, and I don't want to talk about it. Or, okay, I should probably walk that back a bit. I'm not saying these scales are bad, it's just they have a really particular sound. Lydian augmented especially has this magic, almost ethereal quality to it. Like with normal Lydian, raising the fourth actually kinda helps. They're not well suited for harmony, at least not unless you're really into dissonance, which, hey, some composers are, but as melodic scales, they can sound beautiful if you treat them delicately. They're some of the most difficult of these modes to work with, but difficult doesn't mean bad. It just means difficult. This brings us to the fourth modes. In minor, this would be Dorian, so we're expecting to see folksy, upbeat minor scales. Is that what we get? Well, yes, at least from harmonic minor. This scale is what would happen if Lydian and Dorian had a baby. We've got the classic minor third major sixth combo from Dorian, but the sharp 4 from Lydian, giving us a scale that could be called Dorian sharp 4 or Lydian minor, your call. Anyway, this is an interesting twist on Dorian. The classic Dorian sound is the move from 1 minor to 4 major, which we no longer have, but in its place we can go 1 minor 2 major instead. This replaces that powerful perfect fifth root motion with a step, so it feels a bit less dramatic and more comfortable, but in a slightly unnerving way because the sharp 4 is still a tritone above the root. It's a really cool scale. Melodic minor does things a bit differently though. Here we've raised the third, turning us into a major scale, or more precisely, a dominant scale, because again, the combination of major third and minor seventh means we can build a dominant seventh chord off the root. This is important because dominant chords are like the engines of traditional harmony. They're highly directional, setting up powerful resolutions, so they're a great time to introduce some extra tension. The basic dominant scale is, of course, Mixolydian, but in many ways our new scale, Lydian dominant, is better. In normal dominant chords, the third is the leading tone that drives the resolution, so if you're trying to build tension, the last thing you want to do is play the perfect fourth. That's the note you're trying to resolve to, and playing it early just gives up the game, so if you're using Mixolydian, you just have to avoid that note. On the other hand, the sharp 4 from Lydian dominant is fair game, sitting a half step above the root and leaving you room to resolve. And if that's not enough dominant scales, we've got more. The fifth mode of minor is Phrygian, but that's not super relevant here. In both cases, one of the changes we make is raising the third to be major, giving us 2 new dominant scales that look more like Mixolydian than anything else. Harmonic minors is this, called Phrygian dominant, and melodic minors is this, called Aeolian dominant. Like Mixolydian, these both have that unfortunate perfect fourth, but they still give us some fun new toys to play with. The flat 2 in Phrygian dominant and the flat 6 in both of them are much less stable than their major counterparts, giving these scales a darker, harsher sound. This makes them perfect for setting up a resolution to a minor chord, because those are a bit darker to begin with, so you need more bite in order to stick the landing. That's how to use these as chord scales, but of course you can also build your whole song on them, just like any other scale. Phrygian dominant is probably the most popular one for this use, because coming from harmonic minor, it holds onto that distinctive forced leap. In fact, it drags that leap all the way down to the very beginning of the scale, or at least right next to it, which makes it sound way more prominent. You've probably heard it before in songs like The Offspring's Come Out and Play, where where it lends its distinctive character to what would otherwise just be a simple walk up and down the scale. You can also get a really cool shuttle going between 1 major and flat 2 major. This is another one of my favorites from this collection. Aeolian Dominant is a lot more like normal Mixolydian, but a little extra. Mixolydian Harmony takes your typical major progression and makes it kind of melancholy with a minor 5 chord, and the main difference here is that we also have a minor 4. This creates an interesting dynamic where it's major on the bottom, but totally minor on top. It's less common than Phrygian Dominant, cause who doesn't love that spicy flat 2, but it's still a great sound. We've gotta move on though. The 6th mode of minor is Lydian, and harmonic minor stays pretty close to that, with Lydian sharp 2, and I'm not really sure what to make of this scale. In a sense, it's similar to Phrygian Dominant in that putting the 4 sleep so early makes it the center of attention. We can even do the same riff, but here it sounds a bit brighter because we don't have that flat 2 dragging us down. On the other hand, the flat 2 did a great job setting up the root at the end, so this version feels a bit less grounded. It's a trade-off. Harmonically, we get access to 7 major, which is not a chord you see very often, so that's fun. Beyond that though, it's not all that different from Lydian. This isn't a scale I've done all that much with, and I haven't seen it used very often either, but I think it has a lot of potential, so if you're looking to break new musical ground, this might be the scale to do it with. When we turn to melodic minor though, things get tricky. Again. Remember, the 6 is the note that's different between harmonic and melodic minor, so while up to now the 2 scales have been pretty similar, that's not really the case here. I mean, technically it's still only 1 note different between them, but in this case that note is the root, so yeah, kind of a big deal. Anyway, here's what that mode looks like. And if you're thinking, hey, that sounds like Locrian, then yeah, you're right. It's basically Locrian again, except it's got a natural 2nd, so we call it Locrian natural 2. This is sort of similar to Lydian Dominant. Locrian is often used as a chord scale over diminished chords, which tend to want to resolve up a half step. This makes the root of the scale behave like a leading tone, so much like you don't want to play the 4th over a dominant 7th, when you're playing in Locrian, you usually avoid the flat 2. Replacing it with a natural 2 opens up new options without giving away the resolution. Beyond that though, this is very similar to Locrian and can be used in most of the same scenarios. And speaking of Locrian, let's move on to the 7th modes. Now in minor, the 7th mode is Mixolydian, but since both harmonic and melodic minor raise their 7ths, the scales we'd actually expect to see are more like the 7th mode of the major scale, which is Locrian again. That's right, these scales get 2 Locrians, no wonder they're so advanced, but these are no ordinary Locrians. These are special Locrians, and to see why, we're gonna switch things up and start with melodic minors instead. This is called altered, and it may not seem like it, but despite having a minor 3rd, it's actually a dominant scale. How? Well, if we look at it, it's basically just Locrian with a flat 4. You'd think that'd make it sound even darker, but it turns out that if you take a perfect 4th and lower it a half step, what you wind up with is a major 3rd. Combine that with Locrian's flat 7, and boom, you've got the shell of a dominant chord. We don't have a perfect 5th to complete it, but honestly, the perfect 5th doesn't really do much anyway, at least not in a dominant 7th, so you can still get the effect without it. Altered is a really popular dominant scale because you're basically just taking your dominant shell voicing and then adding in all the gnarliest extra notes. You've got your flat 2, your sharp 2, your sharp 4, and your flat 6, all of which are great ways to make your dominant 7th chord feel extra jagged. Plus, there's no perfect 4th, so just like with Phrygian Dominant, you can't accidentally spoil the resolution. Much like Locrian though, Altered doesn't really make a good bass scale. While the perfect 5th doesn't do much on a dominant, it's incredibly important for stabilizing your 1 chord. Depending on which notes you choose, the 1 chord could be diminished or augmented, which is fun, but without the 5th, neither one is gonna feel at rest. And finally, we come to harmonic minor, where the 7th mode is like altered, but the 7th is flatted again, turning it into a diminished 7th or major 6th. This means we don't have a dominant scale anymore, but we do have something even better. A diminished scale. This means we can build a fully diminished 7th off the root, and finding good chord scales for the fully diminished 7th is not easy. This scale is sort of like Locrian's older, more complicated sibling. Locrian gets used a lot as a chord scale for half diminished 7ths, and this scale, called altered diminished or just ultra Locrian, can serve the same role over the rarer but in my opinion cooler fully diminished chords. And it's especially interesting in that role because it's not symmetrical. Diminished 7th chords are just a stack of minor 3rds, so the standard diminished scale is just an alternating pattern of half steps and whole steps, emphasizing that ambiguity and making it hard to nail down your position. Ultralocrian, on the other hand, makes it very clear where the root is. It's the one at the top of the big jump. And yes, since diminished 7ths are symmetrical, the fact that you can build one off the root here means you can also build them off the roots of 3 other modes. Locrian natural 6, Dorian sharp 4, and Lydian sharp 2 are all diminished scales too, they just hide it better. Anyway, hopefully that all helped you understand these skills a bit better. They're an essential part of any advanced musical vocabulary, so I think it's worth taking the time to think about what they really are. Ultimately though, the best way to learn a language is to speak it, so if you really want to familiarize yourself with these or any other scales, there's no better way than just playing them. If anything stood out to you, take it for a spin, see what you find. Especially Lydian Sharp 2. That one's got some real potential. This was a bit of a long one, so if you made it all the way to the end, then first of all, congratulations. And second, while you're here, I want to tell you about a cool thing some friends and I made. It's called Nebula, and it's a streaming service built by some of YouTube's top educators, including Polyphonic, Patrick Willems, Mia Mulder, and for some reason, me. There's lots of really cool stuff over there, but one of my recent favorites is a game show by none other than Tom Scott. It's called Money, and in it, Tom takes 5 YouTubers through a series of deception games in an effort to win $10,000. It's part game show, part social experiment, and it's a blast to watch the players strategize and backstab each other. My only complaint is that I didn't get to play. Maybe next time, Tom. Anyway, if you want to check that out, or if you're interested in any of the other awesome originals from creators like Polyphonic, Real Engineering, and Lindsay Ellis, we've worked out an amazing deal with CuriosityStream where if you sign up for CuriosityStream with the link in the description, not only do you get free access to their massive library of documentaries for an entire month, you also get a Nebula account free for as long as you remain a CuriosityStream member. That's 2 sites of educational value, and if you act now, they're even offering a 40% discount on their already super cheap annual plan. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks to our Patreon patrons for making these videos possible, and extra special thanks to this video's featured patrons, Susan Jones and Jill Sundgaard. If you want to help out and help us pick the next song we analyze too, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.